my grandfather. I grew up in the 1970s in the northeast, obviously in Middlesbrough, and I lived with my grandparents for about 3 or 4 years. My grandfather was a private Joseph Bellis, and he served in the Durham Light Infantry. He started life as a butcher's boy in Durham and was conscripted in the first batch of conscription and ended up briefly in France. He was evacuated before Dunkirk, stayed in England for a few months and then headed out for the rest of the war to Burma. My granddad never talked much about his experience in war. Being a child of the 70s, I grew up on warlord magazines, commando comics and all of that kind of thing. And if you're a certain age, you know that they actually quite glorify war. War's good in its entertainment. And my granddad didn't say anything about this. I asked him about his experiences and he wouldn't talk about it. All he did was show me the bullet wounds that he had. He had a hole in his chest here, a wound there, and one in his back down here. And all I knew is he didn't really like the Japanese very much. Other than that, the only thing I knew is that he woke up every night of his life after the war with nightmares. He never had one night's sleep for the rest of his life. When he got a bit older, and after I'd got married, and we paid him a visit not long before he died, he asked if we'd take him to the Durham Light Infantry Museum in Durham. And so I went up to the Durham Light Infantry Museum with him. We walked around, and it was quite an emotional thing. And on the wall was a big display. It was an old photograph blown up in a canvas, and under it said, taken in the North African desert. And he turned around and he said, no, it wasn't. That was taken in India. And then he proceeded to name everybody in the picture and what happened to them. And only 2 of those people in that picture survived the war. And you can see half of him in that picture, and he was the 3rd person who survived the war. And that's when he opened up and he told me about what the bullet wounds were and why he woke up with nightmares. And some of those stories I'm never going to repeat to other people because they're too horrific. But how he ended up being wounded was he was digging a trench with two friends outside of a big building somewhere. It was quite the old style buildings where they had tennis courts and things like that. And for a week they cleared the jungle back and created a kind of killing ground. And then him and his 2 mates were tasked with digging trenches, not being well behaved apparently. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, there was mortar fire, machine gun fire, and everything. The 3 of them dived into a trench. It was a half-built trench. And that's where he got his bullet wound. The bullet entered the front, came out through here as he was diving, missed every major organ in his body, and he survived and was picked up by his colleagues. The other 2 who were with him weren't so lucky, and both died in the trench. What I learned from that is that actually I'm here today. I've got 2 lovely children, by probably a matter of inches and pure luck. War's horrific. There's a trend at the moment of trying to cover up history, forget the past. As Councillor Larkin said, we need to remember it. We need to remember all the sacrifices these people made, the horror they went through, because a lot of us are only here today because of that sacrifice and because of that horror. And that's really all I wanted to say. There are lots more stories about my granddad that I could say. He was a gentleman, but he was a hard man. He rarely showed emotion unless he saw a Japanese person. That stayed with him for all his life. But what I learned is that war is not what I read in the comics and what I grew up watching on TV. It was actually horrific, and people did lose their lives, and some of us are just here by the grace of God. Thank you.